In this video, Dr. Jordan Peterson explains how you can learn about yourself.
So basically what you've done is remind the rat that life is dangerous. You have not taught it fear. It's not the same thing. The rat knows everything about fear. It learned that it was safe and it was wrong. And that's a really important thing to understand also about what you're like. Because you know, like anxiety, that needs no explanation. Depression, that needs no explanation. What needs explanation is how the hell do you ever feel secure and together ever? Because that's the mystery. And partly the way you do that is by never going anywhere where you're upset. You stay in your territory. And so like this is your territory and everyone knows how to act here, right? So you look around and everyone's sitting and doing exactly the same thing, so you can ignore them. You can pretend that they're not dangerous. And most of the time, that will be correct. And some of the time, it won't be. And so you maintain your emotional stability by staying where you belong. And that's quite different than the psychoanalytic view, you know, that you're calm and well put together if your psyche is properly organized. It's like, this is partly why I introduced you guys to Piaget, because Piaget adds this other element. You know, he says something like, yeah, well, your psyche has to be organized properly, so you have to have turned everything that is a constituent element of you into a functional being, but that being has to be integrated in a functional game-like landscape made of other people who are doing the same thing, and then it's the concordance between your structure and that landscape that makes you emotionally regulated. That's a way different theory. It's a much more sophisticated theory. So you could say in some sense the psychoanalysts had it half right. You know, and also you can be individually pathological in a way that doesn't let you fit into society. But you have to understand the concordance between the social organization and the individual organization to get the picture right. Well, so what do the existentialists say? Well, it's something like, in the depths of your existential terror, the wisdom to cope with that terror will be found. So that's the fundamental idea. And then there's a more profound idea in that, which I would also say is implicit in psychotherapy. The more behavioral the psychotherapy, the more implicit it is. But the idea is that despite the fact that you are mismatched, that you're outmatched by, let's call it existential complexity, there's something in you that's far more complex than you know. And if you challenge it, it will respond by growing and developing, and that will not protect you against the existential anxiety. It's not like a shield or a guard that you're hiding behind. It's not a defense. What happens instead is that you actually learn how to deal with it, you know. So you think about it this way. One of the things that human beings are archetypally related to is fire. And of course, fire is something to be afraid of because it will burn you and it will burn everything down. But by the same token, when we mastered fire, which may have been 2 million years ago, something like that, because it looks like it was about then that we learned how to cook, which made a big difference. So, you know how chimps, I haven't told you the chimp story, I don't think. You know how chimps are sort of shaped like this? They've got this huge barrel-shaped body. Well, yeah, they spend like 12 hours a day chewing leaves. And why is that? Because you go out in the forest and eat leaves and see how much you have to chew so you don't starve to death. It's like leaves aren't edible. They hardly have any nourishment at all. And so if you're a chimp, all you do is sit around and chew leaves. And then you need to have an intestinal tract that could wrap 2 or 3 times around this room so that you can digest the damn things, right? So that's chimp life. Well, human beings, we decided to trade intestinal length for brain. And the way we did that was by learning how to cook. And we mastered fire. And so you might say, well, is fire dangerous? And the answer to that is, well, it depends on how you react to it. It's exactly that, right? You say, well, fire is intrinsically dangerous. It's like, no, fire is multivalent. It has all sorts of possibilities, and some of them are extraordinarily destructive. But if you match your behavior properly to the phenomena, then you can master something like fire. Well, so the idea is that there's a potential inside you, whatever inside means, there's a potential that's part of you. Some of it's genetic potential, and we know that because if we move you into a new environment, new genes will turn on inside of you and manufacture new parts of you. So if you stress yourself optimally, if you push yourself out into the world, you can incorporate information from that journey, the exploration. That's a Piagetian idea, right? You go out and you learn something new and you adjust your behavior to it, and you adjust your concepts to it, and then you can master it. But what Piaget didn't realize was that it also transforms your biological structure at a microscopic level, merely as a consequence of being put in the new situation. So the idea is that there's more to you than you know, and the way you call it out is by challenging yourself voluntarily in as many directions as you can manage. And that's a real thing. It isn't the construction of defenses. It's not something artificial like defense against death anxiety. It's actually how you learn to cope in the world. And the existentialists, I would say, despite their exceptional pessimism, were in some sense unbelievably optimistic, because what they would say, it's the opposite of a straw man argument. They would say, well, how weak are human beings? Ultimately weak. We're up against an opponent, so to speak, a social opponent, say, which would be the crushing weight of society, and a natural opponent that is nature, which overwhelms you. We're up against the ultimate opponent. And so in that sense we're extraordinarily weak, but it turns out that if we face that opponent or that series of opponents, then all sorts of possibilities manifest themselves inside of us, and it isn't clear what the upper limits are to that. So it's so interesting that it's a good example of how if you face what you're afraid of, you can find what you need. You say, well, the existentialists make the strongest case possible for the vulnerability of human beings, and out of that they extract out the strongest case possible why human beings are strong and powerful. It's a very interesting paradox.
Thanks for watching.